You've heard the names that shaped the Civil War: Grant, Lee, Sherman. But there's one name missing. A man who fought his own war. Alone, no army behind him. No orders, no glory. Just a rifle, the wilderness, and a reason that burned deeper than any cause. For years, Union officers patrolled the Tennessee River, never knowing who was watching them from the hills. They'd find men shot clean through the heart. One bullet, one kill. No footprints. No witnesses. Just silence. They called him the Ghost of the Cumberland. But his real name was Jack Hinson. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't seeking fame. He was an ordinary man, a farmer, until the war took everything he loved. And from that day, Jack Hinson stopped being part of history and started rewriting it, one trigger pull at a time. But what could drive a peaceful man to become one of the deadliest snipers of the Civil War? What happened to make him turn against the very country he once called home? Let's go back to where it all began. Before the blood, before the rifle, before the legend, there was peace. Jack Hinson was no soldier. He was a farmer, a husband, a father of 10, living quietly on his plantation along the Tennessee River. His land sat between two warring worlds, the Union and the Confederacy, and Jack wanted nothing to do with either. He was known as fair, calm, respected by both sides. Soldiers from both armies passed through his land, and Jack offered them food, shelter, even advice. To the locals, he was the man who stayed neutral in a world gone mad. But neutrality was a dangerous position during America's deadliest conflict. The war didn't care who wanted peace. It devoured everything in its path. Hinson's home stood near key supply routes used by Union forces. Patrols came and went, suspicious of anyone who didn't pick a side. His sons, restless and proud, sometimes helped Confederate scouts, but Jack himself stayed out of it, or at least tried to. Still, whispers grew. Union officers began to question his loyalty. The lines between enemy and friend blurred. For a time, Jack believed he could ride out the storm. He focused on his crops, his family, and his faith. But deep down, the air was changing, tension building like thunder behind the hills. No one knew it yet, but the war was about to reach Jack Hinson's doorstep. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. It began with a raid, one that should have been routine. Union patrols moved through the countryside, searching for Confederate scouts and guerrillas. They were frustrated, weary, and angry, every ambush, every lost man pushing them closer to the edge. And on one gray morning, their attention turned toward the Hinson farm. Jack wasn't home when the soldiers arrived. His sons, George and John, were young, bold, and proud. They'd been seen moving through the woods, possibly guiding Confederate troops. Maybe they were. Maybe they weren't. In war, rumor was enough to sign a death sentence. The soldiers dragged the boys from their home, accused them of being spies, and without trial, without mercy, executed them on the spot. But the horror didn't end there. Their bodies were mutilated. Their heads displayed on the gateposts of the Hinson property as a warning to others. When Jack returned home and saw them, the world stopped. The air seemed to vanish from his lungs. His wife's screams echoed across the fields. He stood frozen, staring at what was left of his sons, the boys he'd raised to work the land beside him. Neighbors watched from afar, afraid to intervene. Even soldiers nearby knew it had gone too far. But in that moment, Jack Hinson said nothing. He didn't rage. He didn't curse. He simply turned away, and in that silence, something inside him shattered. That night, under a moonless sky, Jack disappeared into the hills. Days later, he visited a local gunsmith, ordered a custom .50 caliber rifle, built with deadly precision, engraved with his initials. A weapon designed not for battle, but for vengeance. From that day forward, he would fight his own war, not for the Confederacy, not for glory, but for justice, the kind that no court could deliver. The farmer was gone. What returned from those woods was something else. A man with the patience of a hunter, the focus of a sniper, and the fury of a father with nothing left to lose. And soon, soldiers along the Tennessee River began to die, one by one, each struck by a single, perfect shot. The ghost of the hills had awakened. The first kill came quietly. A Union officer stood on the deck of a gunboat drifting along the Tennessee River, scanning the tree line. unaware of the eyes watching him from the ridge above. The shot rang out once. He fell instantly. No one saw where it came from. No one ever did. That's how it began. From that day, soldiers whispered his name like a curse. Somewhere in the forests and bluffs of Tennessee, an unseen marksman was hunting them. Patient, silent, methodical. Some said he could hit a target half a mile away. Others claimed he vanished into thin air after every shot. It was no myth. It was Jack Hinson. His custom-made rifle was a masterpiece, over 4 feet long, nearly 20 pounds of cold steel and walnut, with his initials carved on the barrel. Each bullet was hand-cast, each shot deliberate. Jack didn't aim for soldiers at random. He went after officers, scouts, and men connected to the deaths of his sons. Every trigger pull was personal. Union forces launched manhunts, combing the forests, raiding homes, questioning farmers, but Hinson knew the terrain better than any of them. He'd lived on this land his whole life. Every ridge, every ravine, every bend of the river was his ally. To the Union Army, he became a phantom. To locals, a dark folk hero, the man who stood up when no one else could. His legend spread through campfire whispers and terrified reports. Some said he carved notches on his rifle stock for every man he killed. Others swore they'd seen him disappear into the mist like a ghost. For years, Jack Hinson haunted the Tennessee hills, taking his vengeance one bullet at a time. He asked for no help, no recognition, and left no witnesses. By the time the war began to fade, even Union generals knew his name and feared it. A farmer had become a phantom. A father had become a legend. And though his story would fade from the pages of history, his shadow still lingered in the woods where he once stood, rifle steady, eyes cold, waiting for justice that would never truly come. Years passed. The war that had torn the nation apart was ending. But for Jack Hinson, peace was something he could never reclaim. The Union Army never caught him. They tried, burning homes, questioning neighbors, setting traps along the riverbanks. But Jack always slipped through their grasp. By the time the smoke cleared and surrender was declared, he simply vanished. He returned quietly to his land, older, grayer, and hollowed by the weight of what he'd done. The rifle that had once spoken his vengeance now rested in silence. He went back to farming, tending the same fields where his sons once worked. The world around him moved on. Soldiers went home, new leaders rose, and history began to write its official version of the war. Jack Hinson's name was not included. To some, he was a murderer. To others, a patriot. But to most, he was a ghost, erased from history. His story passed only through whispers, family memories, and a few yellowed documents tucked away in forgotten archives. They say he lived out his final years quietly, never boasting, never explaining. The man who had fought his own war simply faded into the background of peace. But legends never die. They just sink into the soil they defended. Even now, along the bluffs of the Tennessee River, there are those who claim you can still feel his presence. Watching, waiting, guarding the place where his sons fell, because some wars never really end. But after all the blood and silence, one question remains. Who was Jack Hinson really? A hero, a killer, or just a father who lost everything? Was Jack Hinson a hero? A man who stood against injustice when no one else could? Or was he something darker, a vigilante consumed by vengeance, blurring the line between justice and bloodlust? That's the haunting thing about history. It's never as clean as the textbooks make it seem. Heroes and villains often wear the same face depending on who's telling the story. Jack Hinson didn't fight for a flag, or for politics, or for glory. He fought for something far more human, the unbearable loss of family, and the desire to make the world feel that same pain. In another time, in another war, he might have been called a freedom fighter, or a terrorist. But perhaps that's why his story was buried. Because it doesn't fit neatly into the sides history loves to take. What we do know is this. One man, with one rifle, changed how an entire army moved. He became a ghost the Union could never catch, and a name the South could never truly claim. And when the war ended, he didn't ask to be remembered. He simply disappeared. Was he right? Was he wrong? Or was he just human? History may erase his name, but not his aim. If stories like this fascinate you, the untold, the erased, the ones history tried to bury, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video. It helps keep forgotten voices like Jack Hinson's alive. Because sometimes the past doesn't whisper, it aims, and when fires,